Welcome. I'm Audrey Malachowski, the collections manager of Staten Island Museum, and we're here to learn about the museum's acquisition of Raphael Sawyer's Girl with Flowers, painted in 1940. I'd like to talk a bit about the process of bringing objects into the collection and what my role is as a collections manager. It's the responsibility of the curators and I to make sure that proposed donations will expand our understanding and relate to the context of the existing collections. When conducting research for an acquisition, I need to know who the donors are, why they've chosen the museum for their gift, and if they have some connection to Staten Island. As far as the artists, I'm looking at the possible influences when they lived, the people they knew, and any connection to our community. When Ethel Krant offered to donate Raphael Sawyer's painting, we knew that we already had one of his prints, Self-Portrait in My 60s, executed between 1960 and 1970. Both she and her husband, Jerome Krant, were born, raised, and worked on Staten Island, contributing to the cultural, medical, and Jewish communities here. Mrs. Krant wanted to donate this portrait in memory of her late husband, Dr. Jerome Krant. Raphael Sawyer was a distant cousin of Dr. Krant, and in 1962, he purchased this painting directly from the artist. The girl in the portrait was named Marcia, and she has lived with the Krants since then, prominently hanging in the dining room. It has found its way to Staten Island Museum, joining our collection of portraits by prominent artists connected to New York City in the mid-20th century. Dr. Krant was a practicing surgeon on Staten Island for over 35 years. He was president of the medical board at what was then called St. Vincent's Hospital, president of the Richmond County Medical Society, and vice president of the Jewish Community Center. After retiring, he became an active medical consultant for Project Hospitality for almost 2 decades. When Sailor's Snug Harbor became one of New York City's first landmarks, Ethel was one of a group of 6 women called the Think Tank, working with historian Barnett Shepard to get the place into shape. She remained involved for over 25 years and served 2 terms on the board of directors, receiving the Snug Harbor Medal in appreciation of her work and dedication. She was also a docent and volunteer at Staten Island Institute of Arts and Sciences, teaching art history using copies of paintings from the Metropolitan Museum of Art that the museum had acquired to support their arts education program. This is Ethel right here. And this is a trophy that the harbor had given to these 6 women. As far as the painting itself, the museum had the work of Guy Pendubois, an instructor Sawyer credits with having a major impact on his work, and contemporaries of his, among whom are Chaim Gross, Reginald Marsh, Isabel Bishop, and Peggy Bacon. We all agreed that this would be a welcome addition to the holdings of our 20th century American artists. And now for Raphael Sawyer. Raphael Sawyer often said, "New York City is my country." His body of work spans over 50 years of the 20th century, years of observing, recording, and documenting the effects of the 20th century on New York City through its people and its built environment. Subjects include portraits of fellow artists, self-portraits, of which there are close to 40, streetscapes of New York City, and particularly men and women responding to the city around them. In 1912, when Raphael and his twin brother Moses were 12, the family, in response to anti-Semitism, immigrated from Russia to the United States, first living in Philadelphia, and then moving to the Bronx, where his father had secured a teaching position in New York at Yeshiva University. His father was a scholar of literature and history, and his mother was an accomplished embroiderer. The family was highly educated, and the children were exposed to art, literature, and music. Drawing was encouraged, and 3 of the 4 brothers went on to become noted artists. The entire family practiced drawing together, and Sawyer recounts an event that he credits with his love of painting from life. One evening, a young man named Ivan Ivanovich came to our house and did a drawing of our father from life. That one could draw a living person was a sudden revelation to me. I stopped drawing for several days, then asked my father to pose for me as he had for Ivan Ivanovich. When the drawing was praised, my elation was boundless. From then on, I became a confirmed realist. I drew only from nature rather than from the imagination like other children. In retrospect, I believe that this limited my art, but perhaps my love of painting people stems from that incident. In 1916, as much as education was prized in the household, the reality of supporting the family forced Raphael and Moses to drop out of school to work. They kept attending Cooper Union in the evening to continue the free drawing lessons they had started in 1914. Raphael entered the National Academy of Design in 1918, an institution that stressed the imitation of the style of Whistler and Sargent. Moses went to a different school to make it easier for them to pursue separate identities. Raphael concurrently studied at the Art Student League, supported by an uncle who paid the $14 a month fee. It was there that he studied under Guy Pendubois, who introduced him to the Ashcan and 14th Street School of Social Realism. But even as he was identified with this movement, his people, women especially, were more introspective when compared to paintings of the other artists in the group, which were more external, exaggerated characters, almost caricatures, while his looked inward with deep introspection. In 1922, when he left the academy, he rejected the imitative instruction he was taught there and spent the 1920s exploring primitivism, a radically different approach from his training. According to his description of that time period, he was focusing on subjects of ordinary interest that were part of my immediate life. His return to realism and focus on introspective women was influenced by his exposure to Degas, leading him to be an adamant realist going forward. From the Archives of American Art, here's an overview of his career. He began to show his paintings in 1926, and in 1929, gallery owner Charles Daniel gave him his first one-man show. Sawyer became one of the leading realist painters and printmakers, often depicting Depression-era transients, Manhattan streetscapes, shoppers, and women at work. He also painted and sketched numerous self-portraits and portraits of his fellow artists and cultural figures, many of whom were also his friends, including Allen Ginsberg, Chaim Gross, and Edward Hopper. Beginning in the 1930s, Sawyer showed his work frequently at the Whitney Museum of American Art, Associated American Artists Galleries, National Collection of Fine Arts, and other national and international exhibitions. During the 1940s and 50s, he was a leading advocate of realism and spoke out against the abstract style that was dominating the New York art scene. In 1953, he co-founded Reality Magazine. Sawyer joined the Forum Gallery in New York in the early 1960s and became a good friend with his dealer, Bella Fishko. Also during the 1960s, he published 3 books, A Painter's Pilgrimage, Homage to Thomas Eakins, and Self-Revealment, a Memoir, and had his first retrospective at the Whitney in 1967. Throughout his career, Sawyer also occasionally taught at art schools, including the Art Students League and the New School. He also collaborated with his friend, writer Isaac Bashevis Singer, by illustrating several of Singer's books. Sawyer and his wife Rebecca, whom he married in 1931, lived the rest of their lives in New York City, but often traveled to Europe. They had one daughter, Mary. Sawyer's final book, Diary of an Artist, was published in 1977, and in 1979, he received the gold medal from the National Arts Club. He continued painting realist subjects until his death in 1987. I am a representative painter. I paint what I see at the time that I see it, not influenced by the movements. In 1931, Sawyer married Rebecca Letts, also Jewish and a close friend of his sister Fanny. After graduating with a master's degree in early childhood education from Teachers College at Columbia, Rebecca taught kindergarten, and this, combined with Sawyer's income as an artist, enabled them to become financially stable through the Depression. The Depression had little effect financially on the couple, but it affected them politically. In 1929, Letts and Sawyer joined the Communist John Reed Club, which encouraged the development of literature, art, and culture sympathetic to communism. I'd like to share some quotes from interviews done with Sawyer in the 60s and the 70s, held by the Archives of American Art. When asked about influences, he indicates that he feels his work is self-revealing, and that he wishes he could be more aloof, more objective, rather than subjective. He holds Velázquez, Vermeer, and Degas up as examples of what he'd like his work to be, citing, "Their detachment is almost abstract, very beautiful, aloof, no sense of the painter." I like these elements in a work of art. My work comes out like myself. Commenting on self-portraits, he expresses that it's a kind of very subjective business. Doing a self-portrait, you have to look at yourself and you have to be in a certain mood. I paint myself when I'm in need of a shave, when I'm disheveled, not well dressed. Those are the moments I like to paint myself. We can see that in this self-portrait here. In 1969, the Associated Artists of New York commissioned Sawyer to create a portfolio of lithographs. This resulted in the Memories portfolio, a set of 10 large lithographs printed in a signed, limited edition of 150 impressions, of which this is a part of. His father is in the framed element floating above his head with a long beard and an open book in front of him. Other works in this portfolio include such diverse subjects as immigrants, his father, his studio, couples dancing, a portrait of Arshile Gorky, mother and child, and men exiting the subway. Responding to a question about his connection to his models, "The young women who pose for me, we spend a lot of time together. We talk about their problems. They're very open with me. I suspect every once in a while I'm in the role of a therapist. When you draw and when you paint, it takes hours and hours and hours of drawing, and they are in a very intimate pose. There is a strong sense of intimacy. I talk and they respond." Finally, where do ideas come from for paintings? From life, what I see around me. Portraits within their habitats, context of their lives. I observe things. Then I get people to actually pose for me with the gestures and movements that I've observed. I have some idea in my head, but the result is always very much different than what I had in mind. It never comes out quite the way I imagined. This painting joins our fine art collection, widening the scope of our American portraits of women. Our collection spans 4 centuries and is a fascinating timeline of changes in clothing, hairstyles, and accessories. Regarding an excerpt from an essay about Raphael Sawyer written in 1942 by Carl Zagrossa, the founder of the Way Gallery and curator of drawings and prints of the Philadelphia Museum of Art between 1941 and 1963, made me think of Girl with Flowers, painted around the same time. In all his work, there's a feeling of gentle rapport, an imaginative feeling with and into his subjects. There is seldom anything posed or artificial in his pictures. Like Degas, he aims to give a fleeting transcript of life, to catch the spontaneity and casualness of a moment of time. By his innate sympathy and sensitive approach, he makes his characters live. They are real. They move and breathe and feel. He portrays them in the intimacy of a homely and instinctive gesture. The scene is filled with the silence of a transfixed moment. The setting, too, is bathed in a soft vibration of atmosphere, full of half-lights and shadows, an intimate presence that makes the room as alive as the characters in it. I always considered art to be something for scrutiny, for contemplation. To me, art is like a cathedral, something to be permanent, eternal, that you can go back to and study and contemplate. It's for contemplation. This portrait draws me in. I want to find out more about her. Imagine what her thoughts were at the time this was created. Hanging a portrait in your space is an invitation for them to become part of your life, to share your morning coffee, see you off to work, and welcome you home as you walk through the door. It becomes a member of the household, consistent and ready to be whatever you need at a chosen moment. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and please visit our museum to see this wonderful portrait in person.